I'll call this meeting to order. What is first on the agenda matters from the public or roll call? Do we need to attendance?
Yes.
Grants.
Ready. Sorry. All right. Start with attendance. Mr. Freeze is not here. I see Tommy here is here. So Gretchen, for the record, Tommy, how do you say your last name, Tommy? Safranek is James's alternate.
Could you spell that? S as in Sam, A, F as in Frank, R, A, N, E, K. Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Chambers with Charlottesville.
Here.
Mr. Stolzenberg with Charlottesville Planning Commission.
Oh, sorry, we're.
Stolzenberg.
Oh, here. Sorry.
Okay. Ms. Hirsch Ballerine with Albemarle County. Mr. Kareen Upland with Albemarle County.
Here.
Mr. Carazana, Albemarle Planning Commission. Mr. Proctor with VDOT. I think he had told me he may be joining on Zoom. Yeah, he may be just coming in a minute late. Mr. Barnes with VDOT. Ms. Jacobs with the TJPDC. John has a vacancy currently. Mr. Palmer with UVA.
Here.
Mr. Wagner with DRPT.
Here.
Ms. Pennington with Rideshare. All right. And the TJPDC staff that is present, Sandy Shackelford. Ms. Shannon, are you present online? Yep. She'll pop on as needed. Ms. Thomas is here and Curtis Scarpinato is here. Okay. So we do have quorum.
All right, matters from the public. Do we have any members of the public present? Let's speak.
No, but Ruth Emmerich is also here with the TJPDC, sorry.
General administration, acceptance of agenda, approval of minutes. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes or want to make a motion?
I have one change in minutes. I did attend the last meeting and said as evidenced by the first item in there, me saying something, I wasn't there. In the first place, but
Is that the October 17th?
believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that again? You mean the September one?
Yeah,
Okay.
September 9th.
Yep, thank you.
All right, would you like to make a motion to pass the minutes of that application?
Yes, I will make the motion to pass the minutes with that modification.
And as a point of clarification, that is the September 19th.
September 9th.
I'll second it. All right, a motion a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Minutes are passed. All right, next up, Sandy, we're moving to 22.
We have another set of minutes. Because we didn't have quorum at the previous meeting, so we're.
Gotcha. Was that motion just for 1 second? All right, so I have a motion for the actual for 17 minutes.
I would motion all minutes, only agenda meeting.
Well, we already approved the ones, so. All remaining minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All minutes are passed. Moving toward 2050.
Sure, so I am going to share my screen. And we have not had a lot of an opportunity to dive in and provide some deep exploration of what these outcomes mean, but I did want to share the progress that we have made so far. So the first thing that I'm going to start with is the transportation demand model or the travel demand model and update you all on those outputs. So if you recall, we we use the travel demand model basically to estimate what the demand is going to look like on the transportation system network, both in the present day. So we use a baseline of 2021 to look at what the volume over capacity is currently, and then we project that out to a future growth year. So we're using 2050 for this long range transportation plan. The future growth year includes the existing transportation system plus any committed projects. So one of the committed projects are projects that are funded but have not yet been constructed. So there's funding awarded, but they haven't been implemented yet. One of the things that we discussed in the previous meeting, I think, is that the network is not necessarily going to, or the model is not necessarily going to reflect substantive impacts of projects that are not like projects that increase capacity. So things that aren't like new roadway alignments or additional lanes being added aren't necessarily going to show a substantive impact on the travel demand model. So while the committed projects have been incorporated into the model, those might not necessarily show up as outputs. So what I did when we developed these maps was we got the output from the VDOT modeling staff using the growth projections that we had discussed in our previous meeting, and they developed the volume over capacity ratios. And so in order to compare apples to apples, what our network looks like now versus what our network would look like in 2050, we standardized the volume to capacity ranges that are reflected in the maps to correlate with a level of service. And what you'll see is that I combined E and F together for no other reason other than my GIS skills are limited and I had 5 categories, so I fit everything into 5.
That's better than.
Yeah.
More than 5, yes.
Yeah. So what that means though is once you get to 1, that means that the volume on the roadway is at capacity. So anything 1 or over means that the volume of that the road can't maintain any other volume. So that seemed logical in my mind, but we can certainly update that with people who can change the number of categories. So we do have some maps, and you all may have had some trouble getting to the PDFs on these. I'll make sure that these get updated in a story map format, but just for the purposes of being able to show some initial outputs. And again, there hasn't been a lot of evaluation of these yet, so I don't have specific points that I want to make, but I did want to show a couple of areas where there are some pretty significant differences. So this first map shows the Garth Road and Ivy area, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see what the current volume over capacity looks like in 2021 compared to 2050. And what you'll see is that the like once you get into like the orange and red, that's where you start getting to those volume over capacity ratios where the volume of projected traffic is exceeding the capacity of the roadway. So you can see that, for example, along Garth Road, it's yellow right now, and by the time we're looking at 2050, it's all orange and red, meaning it's at those levels D, E, and F. You can also look down here. This is, let's see. Yeah.
Is that like a peak level of service versus an average? That would be like the worst, because I can't imagine like all the time.
You know, that's a good question. I think, Chuck, do you know when they do the modeling, is this peak hour conditions or is it the maximum volume that would be expected during like a 1-hour period at the peak? Do you know, Michael?
They're typically daily. So it's looking at the ADT for the day. They can look at hourly. Usually they go in morning or afternoon peak hour, but typically when you do these maps, they're for the ADT for the entire day. So you're basically, the volumes are exceeding the capacity of the road.
For the course of the whole day. So there might be times when it's really, really, really congested and times when it's not, but the average over the, yeah.
Correct.
Those
I mean, they can, like I said, they can run them for a specific morning or afternoon. They can't run for like an hour, but they're running for that time period, and they can get volumes out based on that.
Or any other observations or comments on this first one before I go to the next set of comparisons?
It's good to notice that the 29 bypass is going from orange to red, and then the lower section south of Ivy Road, it's definitely going to orange. That's been historically consistent in the model. That corridor is definitely getting over capacity in the future, and it's just when it's going to happen.
Sure. So by 2050, we're going to get close. Theoretically. All right. So looking at the northern Charlottesville, so this is the northern portion. This map is a little bit busy, but you can see what I thought was interesting is that there were a lot of not just like the 29 and 250 areas that were getting darker as we go that are already kind of dark, but the number of the smaller streets that were lighting up, I thought was also interesting to take note of in the city of Charlottesville.
Can I ask a sort of general question?
Mhm.
What is the assumption of the amount of cars that are going to be included here? I mean, we're talking about this is responsive to population growth, but how many cars are we saying is per household here? And is that consistent as population growth increases?
Yeah, I think I'm going to maybe Chuck or Michael jump in as well. I can answer your question generally in that the socioeconomic data that we provide as part of this model has demographic information that would impact the assumptions made about the volume of traffic. So includes things like the number of school-age children, the average number of people per household, like if there are parks or businesses and things like that. So there's all this data that we're providing, number of like parking, if there's like parking facilities in these places. So there's this data that we're providing that I'm assuming there are some like ITE types of standards associated with that would help them make these projections. But Chuck or Michael, do you all have a better response to that?
Yeah, they use basically vehicles per household as the cutoff, and that's based on the American survey that was done. They tease out that information and come up with some factors to convert it from number of households to vehicles per household.
Why are you asking that question then? Well, because if we change the mode, if we shift the modes that people are using in the city to more pedestrian and bicycle, these roads aren't going to light up, right? We're just assuming that there's going to be so many cars based on number of household cars that we're going to get more cars. And that's just an assumption that we're making. And by making that assumption, we're setting a policy that there's going to be more cars.
Well, keep in mind that this is the no build conditions. So this shows what is projected to happen if there aren't changes that are made.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're still making changes on land use by ag people.
Sure.
We're
Correct.
gonna have more access to more stuff nearby because they're gonna be closer to each other. Are we saying all of them are gonna buy cars to drive around in our city?
We are saying that based on the current present day assumptions, if those continue, this is what the network would look like. So this gives us information on where there might be opportunities to make changes that would not get to this
So
scenario.
clear, this is modeling growth in population, but not any change in mode split or.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's also based on a past trend line. I mean, if the city passes a zoning ordinance, you can have more density. So I was interesting graph the other day talking about population, if the city, Krebs has put together or somebody, and it was showing city population to be relatively flat. Trend line in the county, of course, has been growing. The city starts to grow population again. It's not all reflected in this.
So this is modeling population growth estimates only and on the trends that we've been following. So basically it's saying, what if a whole bunch of people live in the county? Is that right?
It is based on using the same growth projections that were used in the previous plan. So it's the same. And for the city of Charlottesville, I forget what the exact rate was. We assumed a universal, like a standard growth rate across the entire city between 2021 and 2050. So we assumed that everything was going to grow at the same rate.
Across the entire MPO?
No, across the entire city. For the MPO, we use the same linear projection that was developed for the 2045 plan. But the projections were different for each of the TAZs, for each of the analysis zones. So each one of those had a different, slightly different projection based on growth assumptions.
So does that mean that it's looking at, if Charlottesville didn't have much growth in the past, it's looking at that trend line, if Albemarle County had much growth, looking at that trend line for the future? Okay.
I'd very much like to see like assumptions that this is based on, especially the population.
We had all our TAZ data.
Yeah, the TAZ data was in the last meeting packet and it's available through OneDrive. So you're welcome to go and pull that and look through it.
Honestly, I'm less concerned about the population changes and more concerned with, we've been saying we're gonna invest in bike ped, and now we're saying, look at this model that doesn't take into account bike ped infrastructure investments and doesn't then take into account any changes in mode shift. Look at how bad this bypass is giving. And that almost seems like it's leading us down the path of, we should fix this bypass, more lanes. I think we're got to pump the brakes on that pretty quickly.
Well, I think part of this is to say, if we don't do anything, this is what it might look like. But a solution to fixing the bypass is not just build more lanes. It could be to build a better multimodal network.
But then how does that show up when we say, look at the no build, look at the build? The build has a multimodal network, but it's not being evaluated in this model.
I think that's going to be one of the
You
challenges.
can adjust the factors. You can adjust the factors in the model. The thing is we're basing this on survey data that we've gotten from surveys. So if you're going to basically do that in the future, you've got to basically change people's behavior to actually use that network versus what they historically have done. So if the data changes, those numbers will change in the future. If that makes sense, you can't force people to make the mode shift if they don't want to do it.
Yeah, I'd say we do.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, we've looked at this a number of times. We've looked at park and ride lots and sensitivity analysis on different ways we could try to get people to do that. I mean, you could put a toll restriction on the city. The city could do this and basically toll cars as they enter the city. But just because you're seeing red in the city doesn't mean it's people that necessarily live in the city. It's people going from their residence to jobs, and the jobs are in the city. And so those people are driving their cars to those locations, and they're using the roadways to do that. To and from, and the people going to events in the city. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have people walking. That's included in the model too. It's just not, we're basically doing that on diversion versus actually modeling it. So, but those models are factors that can be changed in the model.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I just think we probably want to talk about changing those factors, because sticking with the status quo is probably not going to tell us whether our goals are being met by multimodal projects.
Well,
So we should probably be looking at what those factors would look like under what our goals would be.
yeah. So once we get to a point where we start prioritizing projects and creating sort of like our preferred scenario for what the 2050 network would look like, we can go back and model this again and say, this is what it looks like if we don't do anything. We just don't have the projects to put in to model that yet. So this is just showing, if we don't do anything, this is what the network will look like based on the projects that we're prioritizing. If we implement all those by 2050, this is what the network could look like.
So I think, even in the no build scenario, even if you didn't build any bike ped projects, right? I'm still finding it hard to separate, land use from the projections, right? Like if you take the assumption of population growth in all these different places and the same, mode share split that we have now, average across these places. It's, that is an important assumption, right? But if you like where the land use goes, or where more intense land use, more residences go, is important, right? Because if you look beyond those averages at the micro level, we already have very different, places with very different mode shares, right? Like if you look at the modal split of my building, like it is very much more like walking and maybe bus than, the driving share of most of the rest of the area, right? And if you make more of my building right over there, right next door, the people who would move in would be expected to have, the mode share of, similar to my building, right? And whereas if you put them out in, Hollymead, they're gonna have a mode share similar to others in Hollymead. And even if you don't move anyone like in their existing place to a different pattern, you still can create a mode shift via where you're putting the new people.
Mhm.
I think we get worked up over the model pretty much every time.
Yeah.
It's brought up. So maybe you could talk us down and remind us how it's going to be used in the long-term range transportation plan.
Yeah, so one of the things that I would say, for example, is that we are using this because we're required to. So, so there's not necessarily, other than using some of the future growth projections for our land use coordination evaluation factor, there's not a lot of this that is actually going into the evaluation of the system network. It is illustrative. And the other thing that I would say is that if you recall, when we were talking about congestion was a pretty low scoring factor weighting overall compared to where the priorities were overall with the region. So a lot of the other factors, I mean, I think we do want to consider congestion, because if there's a place that's going to become very, very congested, we do want to make sure that we are, forward thinking, especially as we design what kinds of improvements might come up for the projects. We want to make sure that we are factoring that future congestion. But other things like accessibility and like safety are going to be much more highly weighted. The other thing that I will go ahead and mention, and Rory, I think you weren't at the last meeting, so you didn't get the benefit of hearing this, is that this we did want to be efficient about developing the growth projections for this particular model, because basically, as soon as VDOT hires some additional modeling staff, we're going to move into a process of updating the model. And that's going to be the opportunity where we can take a much more comprehensive review of what our assumptions are about where growth is going to be located throughout the region.
Great.
So. Good discussion though, guys. I think it's important that we're all paying attention and that we all like understand what this is and is not doing. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to just sort of understand how to engage in the planning discussion. And then we'll look at North 29. One thing that I thought was really interesting in North 29, and again, I didn't have time to dive into this, but I'm sure it's related to some of the projects that have been implemented, is that there's actually an improvement in volume over capacity that is being shown along this segment of North 29, like around the Hollymead area. So I don't know if that maybe is something we need to look into further, or if there might be some improvements that would.
Is that
Make
the
sense.
traffic shifting over
To polo grounds.
Yeah.
Where all the development is being dumped on polo grounds, and was it
Yeah.
right only out onto 29?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
There you go. So, but it's off 29, so good job, everybody.
Right there.
So we will develop this. There are high resolution PDFs that were linked to the packet. I don't know. I heard very late in the game that some of those links may not work, but we'll work on pulling this into story maps so you all can look at this in more detail.
A suggestion might be to use like a gray color for the A streets, something like that, so they sort of go back to the background, and the more problematic ones will stand out a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah.
Green really pops. That's the thing.
It's all out there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's really the yellow, orange, and red ones that we probably want to take notice of.
Or increase the thickness of the lines, it looks like red.
Yeah.
If possible.
I think I know somebody who can do that.
Symbology.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on the model outputs or anything else you guys want to go back and look at? Okay. All right. So we can keep going into the needs prioritization. Unfortunately, we have not completed the needs prioritization yet, but I am fairly confident we'll be able to finish it before the end of the year because we started with the hardest factors and we got through those, and I think the other ones should be more straightforward. So to date, we have completed the bike ped safety and we have completed the multimodal accessibility. That's the potential for accessibility improvement needs prioritization. And then we're very close to finishing the roadway safety. Just know that we are working with some limited staff capacity right now as our GIS expert is diverted to doing a lot of other things at the moment. So we're working through those as quickly and efficiently as we can. So as soon as we finish the roadway safety, we're going to start working on the other two factors, which should be much more expeditious. So again, just to give you a little bit of a preview, and again, I want to offer the appropriate caveat that you know, this is based on our initial review of the data prioritization. These are not intended to be considered as individual performance metrics, but will be cumulative across all of the different performance metrics. However, I do think that looking at these individually is a good opportunity to make sure that the data makes sense so that when we do combine it, we're combining things that are logical and rational. And I also want to reiterate that the data analysis is only going to be part of how we are prioritizing the projects. We are going to overlay this against a heat map of public comments and determine where things are lining up and whether there is some discrepancy. And we'll use that cumulatively to identify where our highest priorities are for the needs. So this first one is looking at the bicycle and pedestrian safety prioritization. So if you recall, this is using data that is pulled from the pedestrian safety action plan, which also includes bicycle safety components. You all had indicated in a previous meeting, we had some issues with the data quality that was in the mapping when I pulled this for review. So you all had indicated, I think, that you wanted to use the top 5% of the statewide corridors because there were some issues with the district corridors. However, the parameters that were reported between the statewide and the district parameters were different. And when I went back to pull the data had been corrected. So what we ended up doing was using the top 5% of the regional corridors or the district corridors because that covered the full range of the top 5% of the statewide corridors. And if we just use the top 1% of the district corridors, there were some areas that would not have been included that were in the statewide top 5%. So there was a little bit change in the data that we used, but I made sure to use the data that covered all of the locations that you all had indicated you wanted to be evaluated. So again, the darker red show where the highest priority needs are. And the lighter show where there are low needs. And if you recall, this is measuring the difference between current access to jobs using bicycles. And I believe it was I don't recall the specific threshold. It might be in the packet. If it was what the minute was, I think it was maybe like a 5-mile distance between where you can currently access them at a level of travel stress of 1 and how many jobs you could access if you could access all of the level of travel stress 4 or less. So it's showing basically the opportunity to improve if you could decrease the level of travel stress for everything to a 1, this is where there would be the most opportunity to improve access to jobs. This is also showing this by census block of the starting location. So it's not necessarily showing the segment where the improvement should occur, but it's showing where the opportunity is to improve access from where people are starting based on their census block. Any questions on this? And again, we'll make all this data available. Do you want to keep looking, Ben? You look very engrossed. Okay. Okay. Wait, one is. Oh no, sorry, ignore what I just said because this is all bike ped safety, which is much more easy to explain. Apply everything I just said to this map instead.
So the darker the color says that that's the bigger the delta between unsafe and potentially safe street that people might want to use to get the job.
Unsafe or uncomfortable, correct? Yeah. And so I think these two images together, again, and this is why I think it's interesting to talk about cumulatively, they're almost capturing different segments of the MPO area. Because if you look at where the safety improvements are needed, it's largely in the urban center. And then if you look at where the greatest potential is to improve access, you're looking more at the outer ring to a greater extent.
You said this is the top 5% within the regional districts,
The bike ped safety one is, yeah.
right? How big is a district? What do you mean by district?
It's the VDOT, it's a VDOT district. So basically, there's a bicycle and pedestrian safety action plan map, and basically what is shown right here is basically the full range of the corridors that are identified on that map. They're just prioritized in different ways. So you shouldn't see anything on the VDOT map where it identifies the top 5% corridors that isn't lit up here. It's just a matter of prioritizing among what those identified corridors are. Okay, so that's the safety, and then this is the accessibility improvement, or the potential for accessibility improvement.
So if there are safety problems in the middle of downtown, why don't those show up on the access to jobs? Aren't there lots of jobs in downtown, or is it because you can take other routes around them?
It's because you're not looking at the number of accidents, you're looking at basically the level of travel stress, which is about the infrastructure that's available. The other thing to keep in mind that this one is a little bit confusing for is that this is highlighting, what's getting highlighted is the census blocks that people are traveling from. So they might be going to downtown, but they're coming from these other areas. So it's not showing like where their destination is, it's showing where they're originating from.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And how does this thing then work for the next step? How does that out?
In the next step, what do you mean the next step?
Well, I mean, this gets applied to try to get
Yes.
the needs, and so
Yeah, so then we'll apply all of the weighting factors to each of these, and we'll develop one map with all of the weighting factors cumulatively that will show the overall needs throughout the region. So we'll take each of these individual metrics and pull them together.
And so does that kind of like say that these road segments that are showing up are probably good places for projects? Or is it going to show these are areas that are problematic, and if there's a facility that's not on a road segment, I'm looking at the hydraulic area,
Yeah.
thinking about Charlotte Humphreys Park and all of that stuff, and you know, that's not showing up on this.
It's going to show us where there are problems with the system. So then we're going to have to review what those problems are and whether or not we have a problem or a project that could address that problem. Or those problems that cumulatively. So maybe it's a safety and an accessibility issue. What projects do we have that might resolve that issue? It could be on that actual road segment. It could be another project that would, you know, address the issue that's on that road segment, but it may not be, you know, it could be like an off-road trail, or, you know, building a parallel road network or something like that.
So when I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at, what is that? That's not. What's the road, the northern road, the big loop? Is that Earlysville Road?
That's hydraulic.
Which one right here?
The red one.
This one right here? Yeah, that's hydraulic.
Yeah, okay. So if I'm looking at that, I can't assume by looking at that where they're going. They could be going, if they're originating in the middle, they could be going north on that route versus south, potentially towards downtown.
Right.
We don't know. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, there is some level of qualitative review that we'll have to do. That this isn't perfect. It gives us an indication, and we'll have to use some judgment about how we interpret that, but it gives us a baseline to start to help us understand where the issues are. So that's by the
Adding lanes to the bypass, like lanes like that. Yes.
Auto access to jobs. One thing I want to mention for here is that we tried, we started with 45 minutes because that was what was recommended by the consultants, but this is what 45 minutes looks like. And I think we had a discussion with the consultant team and determined that 45 minutes for a region our size might not give us very good data, because you can get most places in our region within 45 minutes. So we went with a 25. We're suggesting we use this 25-minute threshold for measuring the potential for accessibility improvement, because that is, I think 23 minutes is the statewide average for commute times. So that seems to be a little bit more logical as far as highlighting the areas that would have the highest needs based on this category. And as a reminder, this is measuring the difference between, or the potential for accessibility improvement between peak hour and non-peak hour travel conditions for vehicle access to jobs.
So in peak hours, people coming from those places have trouble getting to their job in 25 minutes.
Correct. Or there's an opportunity to improve. Yeah.
Are all these segments in the MPO or some of them out?
They are, all these are in the MPO. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 60 or 250.
Yeah.
Okay.
I felt like this made sense, that it would be probably the areas that were furthest out that would.
And they're probably driving into the city.
Correct. Correct. All right. So this one is a little bit unique. So we have the transit access to jobs, and this is measuring the access across America data to the best that I understand, because one of the questions I had when I looked at this is that this is not necessarily just capturing existing transit routes, but the access across America data that was used to generate this map is capturing where people who are using transit are starting from. So it includes any like walking trip, or if they're driving to a transit stop and then getting on transit, it would capture those trips as well, or that would all be part of the transit trip. So this is capturing where is there opportunity to improve access to jobs by transit, comparing existing trip times to what trip times could be if transit operated as efficiently as a vehicle under the same during the same conditions or peak hour conditions.
So this is pointing us to, looks like where we need to make buses.
Potentially where maybe there could be some efficient or some interest in improving transit as a viable form of transportation.
Does it support the microcat stuff or not? Because
no, because it's using historic data. So that is something that we could certainly provide some commentary on.
And is this capped at a certain time threshold, like the other one?
I believe it's 45 minutes, either 45 minutes or it might be an hour. This one might be an hour.
I'm curious because we're not seeing a whole lot of needs for additional transit in the city or in the urban areas.
Oh, just wait.
When it comes down.
Just wait. So maybe to complete that story, Ben, that
For comparing auto at 25 minutes to a transit commute at a half an hour or at an hour, we're not really comparing apples to oranges there.
so maybe we should reduce the transit time. Okay. We could run that and see if it makes a difference. I think we can do it in any 5-minute interval. So
Okay.
would you like to see 45 minutes and a half an hour, or
Sure, it's not too much work.
I'll ask Alan. I think he's good at it by now, though. The first time is hard. After that, you kind of understand what you're doing.
So wait, people are somehow originating, walking or driving to transit from like Ivy? What this map is telling me?
That is my understanding.
Well, so does that transit include like the satellite parking buses that UVA runs? You go park at JPJ and you take the, whatever they're calling their lines now, and you go to the hospital. That is transit.
I would assume so. I really need to, I can find that out about like what the yeah, how is transit defined in that data set?
Right,
Yeah.
included.
Yeah.
Well, there you phrase that, that's what we're calling transit.
Yeah.
Everyone always wanted target rides. It's just that means we gotta build more.
So if we go and look at the transit access to jobs by disadvantaged populations, we kind of get, again, we flip it over. So what this is measuring is it's using the equity emphasis areas that are developed in VTrans. And so equity emphasis areas are kind of like a cumulative composite of different segments of the population that might be considered more vulnerable populations. So people over, I think it's over the age of 70, people with disabilities, people who might be in minority demographic groups, things like that. It's like it's a composite of a lot of these factors that you know, are normally considered as part of the equity considerations. So for this evaluation metric, you're only comparing the census blocks where people are originating from of the disadvantaged populations based on the equity emphasis areas where there's already existing transit service. So in here, you are basically comparing how can we improve existing, the way that people who are currently using transit how can transit be more efficient for those people, basically. So I think that's kind of between these two that sort of captures two different sides of the discussion around improving the efficiency of the transit system.
And I'm assuming this is also at the hour of the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the thing that everywhere we transfer this.
Maybe not quite everywhere, but yeah. But again, we're weighting these a little bit differently, right? So I forget what the breakdown was. I think we're weighting the disadvantaged populations metric by 20%, the other one by 10% or something like that.
So I mean, is it looking at communities and people to potential jobs? And that's what we're looking at here, that are current, so not necessarily the folks that are currently using it under those labels, but the potential to be able to use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we are measuring where there are census blocks that meet that disadvantaged population definition. So that's the first thing. The red is showing like where there are census blocks of people that meet these equity emphasis areas definitions, and where there are opportunities to improve the efficiency of transit to provide better access to jobs. So if transit was operating as efficiently as automobiles were operating during peak hour conditions, this is where there would be, these are where there is the greatest opportunity to improve access to jobs for those populations.
So does this data flash map need to, or does it already like talk with the bicycle, you know, access to jobs data they had earlier?
We're going to combine all of this together into one picture.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that this is including, so that this is something we're going to combine all of this together, and then we're going to have to look at what the needs are, and we're going to have to like figure out what's the story that we're being told here through this data.
Are you planning on just doing one combination or doing a combination for each prioritization category? So like one for safety, one for multimodal, so that we know what needs category is actually highlighting that location.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to the consultants. My hope is that we'll be able to maintain that information, because the goal is to have a cumulative map where we're weighting all of these things differently. We're going to have one set of priorities, right? So we'll have to do that eventually. My hope, though, is that the way the data is captured and the way that that's coded onto here is we'll be able to look at what is contributing to that score. Yeah. Okay. Any other, I think that's the last one. Yeah, that's the last one. Any other comments or observations or questions so far? Well, we're working, we'll try to finish up the rest of these by, fingers crossed, the end of the month, and hopefully we'll start talking about potential projects in January. Yeah.
Well, we're right on time. Rolling into smart scale round 6.
So for those of you that did not watch the Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting, that was a fairly interesting one to watch, but there was a Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting yesterday, and the big thing that they voted on was the changes to Smart Scale Round 6. So Michael, were you following along?
I have other things to do, unfortunately.
It was actually
I
pretty,
stopped listening to- but-
yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting meeting. So Chuck, and I know Jessica was watching too, feel free to jump in or correct me if I misspeak. So to summarize the decisions that were made from yesterday's meeting about the updated changes to Smart Scale. The first item for discussion was that the OIP staff had proposed using a future-looking congestion factor, looking 10 years into the future to calculate project benefits. They did not approve using a 10-year growth horizon. They approved using a 7-year future congestion factor. So we will be using 7 years. And the logic behind that was basically it takes a year to build the project, or I don't know. It had to do with it takes a year to build the project, or
I think it was.
Yeah.
We're receiving funding 6 years out plus the 1 year it takes to apply for the project.
Sure. So you're using a future congestion year for when the project will actually be constructed. That makes way more sense than what I was trying to remember. The changes to the economic development measure, if you recall, they were talking about instead of inputting manually information from site plans, they want all the information to be submitted to the Virginia Scans Economic Development Database. And so the nice thing is that it's less manual for anybody who is validating or inputting applications, but there will be a little bit of a transition to get all of the information into Virginia Scans, and it's also a different type of economic development that goes into Virginia Scans versus the site plans. It's Virginia Scans is really a database that they're using to market sites for economic development purposes. So
site plans wouldn't go into there?
yeah, it's approved site plans would not go into that. It would, yeah, it would basically be like sites that are being marketed or that maybe have been identified for future development.
Like developable greenfield sites will become the economic development measure,
Like big things.
They talked about that in the meeting, and that was, they tried to assure people that that was not the only thing that was going to count, but it is unclear besides that what will.
seems bad.
That's a bad idea.
What's entered in by the localities? There's some categories for non-greenfield stuff, but it's not clear as to how that stuff's entered, because most of the stuff that's in there right now is greenfield stuff.
Currently.
I think you can, I believe that you can enter in square footage of an existing building that's for lease. So
Would something like an X, like a big grayfield site, be probably qualifying?
Probably, Amar County has started to talk to our economic development staff, and we're trying to figure it out, but there's a lot of unknowns. There's also some updates happening to the Virginia Scan website, which is gonna complicate all of this. But just letting you know, we're working on it, and there's just a lot of unknowns right now.
I think one of the challenges is that the people in this room are transportation people, and this is something probably the economic development people have a little bit more familiarity with. So will need to be some coordination.
Yeah, it seems like we talked about this.
Yeah,
There's gonna have to be a strategy to like figure out how to
yeah,
get what we want to be considered
Yeah.
Virginia Scan.
into it, if
Yeah.
that's possible.
For a second, there's gonna be exciting, there's gonna be a statewide database of site plans.
no. So there was a refined.
Less exciting. More unknown than exciting.
Yeah, well,
I am excited not to have to input 20 or 30 site plans. So
Yeah, but the impact for you.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There was there was an approval of some modifications to the high priority program eligibility. So I'll talk about those in more detail. It was not what had been presented previously. So I'll go through that. If you recall, there were also some proposed adjustments to the application limits, and they had been talking about introducing a 3-tier application limit, but in all those proposed scenarios, they were reducing overall the number of applications. That motion actually failed, so we are retaining the same number of applications that we had previously. meaning that the MPO Albemarle County, the city of Charlottesville, the TJPDC, the transit providers would all get 4 applications for our area. And then there was a lot of discussion about adjustments to the weighting factors, and there was approval of an alternative weighting scenario from what had been presented, and I'll go through that in a minute. First of all, as far as
Sandy?
Yeah.
But they did eliminate land use as a factor area totally. And so it's not a multiplier anymore.
correct,
She's coming to that.
So
Yeah.
they just eliminated it as a factor area. So now instead of having 6 factor areas, there's only 5.
there was some discussion at the meeting about the legality of that, so we may hear more in the future, but yeah. So land
In
use,
the regulations that way, it's stated in the regulations as a factor.
So stay tuned.
so stay tuned. That discussion was pretty interesting at the CTB meeting, if you have an appetite to go back and watch it. So we'll start with the factor weighting modifications. They removed land use completely. If this moves forward as was voted on by the CTB, then land use will not be considered at all. If you recall, the MPO is area type B. So there were some adjustments. So what had been proposed by the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment and their staff was to keep safety at 25%, congestion at 25%, and accessibility at 20%. So the final vote reallocated that weighting a little bit. It was a very interesting discussion about how safety should be considered. The commissioner actually made the point that he was concerned about giving too much weight to safety, because once you give safety that amount of weighting, it would be difficult to ever take it back away from safety. And so his opinion was that it might make more sense to redistribute that weighting to congestion and accessibility instead of congestion and safety. And he also made the point that we have a specific program for safety improvements, the highway safety improvement program. So interestingly, it was only for type B that the commissioner's recommendation was adopted. For the other types, it was either the overall staff recommendation or an alternative recommendation for the distribution of the weighting factors that was considered, or that was voted on or approved. So until we hear anything further, this is the weighting that we'll assume will be used to evaluate our smart scale projects in round 6. And then the other update is that they did finalize a definition for the high priority project. So if you recall, these are the project types that the MPO will be eligible to submit for the high priority program, because MPOs, PDCs, and transit agencies are only eligible to submit projects to the high priority program. Last meeting and in a couple meetings previously, they had added this new bridge category, and they did not specify that that would have to be a highway bridge. In the meeting yesterday, they did specify that that would have to be a highway bridge. So it's only going to be new bridges with a highway component that would be eligible as a high priority project for MPOs, which means that there is some question about whether or not the MPO would be able to submit the Ravenna River Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. The only reason I say that there is some question is because one of the other things they did was they added as an eligible project type, this last bullet here, entire corridor improvements that were identified as preferred alternatives and STARS, which is a safety improvement study that VDOT is able to develop for areas, the pipeline studies, or they added this category MPO study that is done in coordination with the state. Again, this was just added at the CTB meeting. That was the first time we heard it. So I think we'll need some clarification on what type of project that would include. So I think we'll see. Any questions or discussions on the changes?
Was there any mention of the past performance?
No, that's not part of this discussion.
Sandy, one point I wanted to add is in the discussion about the application limit. One thing that came up, and I'm not clear where they landed, and there was discussion of like administratively directing VDOT staff to throw out applications that did not, that were not complete. So I know at least in Albemarle County's experience, there were things that we were waiting on to submit with our applications. And we received those things after the deadline and we were still able to submit those applications. But that would likely not be the case for this next coming round.
So you screened out for incomplete.
Yes.
Yeah, there was some discussion on that because what the Commonwealth Transportation Board member said is, well, we want it to still be a little bit nuanced. Like if it's 90% complete, we still want you to be able to use some judgment or some discretion. And they did not take formal action on sort of like having a motion on that point. But I think, I think we want to make sure our applications are complete to avoid having to find out how literally they intend to enforce that.
Yeah, I will say that I actually had a conversation with Brooke on this a couple of weeks ago, and our district was one of the highest districts with the highest overall readiness amongst all the applications. So we're doing a really good job in this regard compared to some of the other districts which are not doing very good at all. So just that as a tidbit, we're doing what we need to do, I think. And so we'll just have to tweak a few things to try to make it be more efficient.
And Chuck, when you say other areas not doing a very good job, you mean submitting very incomplete applications?
Correct. We're doing a very good job. Like over 90% of our applications are complete. Whereas a lot of other districts, it's less than 50%.
So don't take a lot of the discussion personally.
Yes. So it's not us. We're doing a good job.
So what this means is that as we think about what is going to be eligible for the MPO to submit in round 6, we are looking at potentially the DDI at I-64 and 5th Street, or another improvement at 64 and 5th Street at that exit. Potentially the Hillsdale South extension is still would still be an eligible project if that was something the MPO wanted to move forward with. Or with the addition of that last category for those corridor improvements or roadway improvements that were identified as part of a preferred scenario in a VDOT plan, we could submit some of the projects that were identified in the round 5 pipeline study as a complete bundle. So instead of just like the Peter Jefferson Parkway improvement and the Rolkin Road improvement, we could submit both of those together as a preferred alternative for that corridor as an example. And there might be some other I know Chuck and I had a very brief conversation. There might be some other corridor studies that have been completed that we might have some bundled up projects that could be eligible if there was interest in moving those forward. And then we still have the 2 VDOT pipeline projects that don't have preferred alternatives that have been recommended yet, but are clearly being developed to prepare for smart scale round 6. So. Yeah. Any other discussion or questions or things to add on that?
Isn't it TJPDC will be able to submit 4?
Yep, I forgot.
Okay.
I forgot that they changed it. So yeah, we'll be able to submit 4 now.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. If there are no other questions or comments on that, then Chuck or Michael, do you all have any updates for the pipeline projects you want to share?
We are working on phase 2. We've issued the notice to proceed. So the consultants actually working on developing the alternatives. We had a meeting with them yesterday, and we're probably looking at teams meetings and stakeholders group meetings in the first part of January. And we're looking at public outreach probably later in January, once we get through those meetings in early January. So more to come on that. The Ivy Road corridor is probably going to lag a little bit more because it's got a lot of stuff that they're looking at. So it will probably be in February before we get to the public outreach for that one. And later in the month of January for those actual meetings. But that's pretty much it. You got anything else, Michael?
No, thank you for reading out those talking points I just gave you. No, I don't have anything else. Covered it.
All right,
That's it for smart scale.
that's it for Marcel. Any other thoughts or comments? On to staff updates.
Can I actually just ask a question that I feel like I should know the answer to, so I'm admitting it, I don't. Through the LRTP process, we decided to go policy board meetings monthly, which means as these are going through the public process in January and February, there'll still be enough time to get it before MPO Tech and MPO before we're submitting applications. I was just thinking through that every other month is gonna mess us up with timing, but
That said, I do think that the pre-applications will need to be submitted in March, is that correct? So we don't have a lot of time to make decisions about what we want to move forward with.
Well, yeah.
And I guess also I'd say, the big push is to try to figure out really now what projects would be ones that would want to be studied by VDOT that aren't part of a pipeline study or something previous. So obviously the exit 120, something that VDOT's looking at right now. There's other projects. I mean, I don't know if Hillsdale extensions, for example, that's something serious that people want to move forward to. It probably needs to be considered fairly quickly. And decision made so that Chuck has enough time to start working on a project with the consultant and getting it up to speed. So, and when do you all think you're picking your projects?
Well, we'll see what the policy board says next week. I would imagine probably January at the earliest. We might be able to get an indication, though that's not a formal vote. The next meetings.
So we do have 25 more minutes for that, if you guys want to chat about it a bit. So how much work is involved in submitting an application that's already been submitted by Hillsdale South?
I think, Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the biggest thing would be that we would need to update the cost estimates, correct?
For Hillsdale South?
Yeah.
We'd have to look at it and see, make sure we're clear on the concept. I think L&D will relook at the concept and make sure it's complete, according to the new policies and stuff, and then we'd have to update the estimate.
The other thing that we may want to do is to not just to see if it's complete, but to consider if we want that scope to remain as it is, or if we want to break it out any further. That project was pretty expensive, 2 rounds ago. So, we may want to see if there are some opportunities to reduce the scope a little bit.
And allow them to change to that area.
Sure.
And is it still a project that's worthwhile moving forward?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And is there support for it?
I mean, we'd have to get resolutions from the city for support of that project too. So, because it is entirely in the city.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection from 2 years ago was not that there was anyone in the city that was particularly against it. I was probably the most down on it of anybody, but big fan of Szechuan, so this would tear it down. But they're going to retire. It's fine. So what about? I mean, is this sort of the list of projects we are under consideration, or are we thinking of finding more?
These are the list of projects that I'm aware of off the top of my head that meet that high priority project eligibility.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the bridge briefly? I know it's a sore subject, but if it is eligible under the criteria.
under the new bullet,
Yeah, do we submit it? Do we submit it the same way? Did we get that debrief we had talked about a while ago?
Yeah, I think regardless, we could reapply for the raise grant if we wanted to. The MPO wouldn't necessarily be eligible. Albemarle County could still be eligible, but it would only be eligible for the district grant program, not the high priority program.
Right.
So I guess it's not necessarily that it's a complete no-go, it's just that the MPO may not have a path forward directly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's
unless through raise grant.
except through the raise grant.
And just resubmitting a raise grant based on the debrief that we got.
Are you saying the debrief is like why you didn't get, or we didn't get the raise grant?
Yes,
Okay, and that's been received?
yes,
Okay,
And was it basically, you usually have to try twice, so try again?
it scored very high and was a merit project, it just didn't make the cut for the
Yeah.
extra funding.
Okay,
So,
saying it was too much.
no, meaning that it's just a competitive process.
Other projects were awarded above it, but it still scored very, very well.
Like it met the highest like scoring threshold that it could meet. And not get funded. So basically, we were strongly encouraged to resubmit the application.
But it has to be under a different entity.
or smart scale.
No, the raise grant, yeah, the raise, not for the raise grant. For the raise grant, we can resubmit the raise grant. And just to clarify, sorry, Tommy, I forget you haven't been around for all the discussions. The raise grant was submitted to complete the preliminary engineering because one of the reasons the cost of the bridge was so high is because the contingencies were so high because there hadn't been any level of preliminary engineering that was completed to answer some questions about like what are the geotechnic conditions that the bridge would be built on and things like that.
So, some question maybe, you guys said Albemarle, why wouldn't the city be eligible? Oh, because the, or
Yeah.
goes to, right,
Yeah.
well. The city did just make a very large land purchase, that might hold some relevance to that project,
Mhm.
Well, on that, and I, you know, Jessica's on here, but I've talked to her and I've followed along with this project as a volunteer and so forth.
Mhm.
The chosen alignments that Ray just mentioned, is that for sure? Everyone's like, we chose this and we're not gonna revisit the other alignment that was talked about?
I think that's really been a question that we would pose with the policy board, but the last discussion we had with the policy board, they did not indicate that they would like to revisit the alignment.
And is that because the community support towards one versus the other?
no, the stakeholder committee was almost unanimous in supporting the Chesapeake alignment. This committee supported the other alignment. I think on policy, county supervisors want the alignment to go to their very nice new adaptive reuse project over there. And I think the city did not have a strong position, and one counselor agreed that it didn't really matter so much to let the county have their way. Yeah,
And in memory, was one bridge higher than the other in terms of flood issues and so forth? Was that a part of?
Yeah, the Chesapeake, I think one of the factors is that there was a higher rate, or there was a higher risk that some sort of mitigation would be needed at the southern alignment, but there were more options for adjusting the alignment at the southern option compared to the northern option at Chesapeake. And one of the concerns is that if there was a need to revise the alignment at Chesapeake, probably the most likely scenario would be that it would impact the neighborhood directly, which there was a lot of vocal opposition from that neighborhood about the location of the bridge there.
But at this point, the decision has been made by the policy board. It's kind of a moot point for us
Well,
to pick at this gap.
they made the decision, especially as far as I'm aware, they've only made the decision to choose that alignment for our last smart scale submission and to approve a raise grant with that alignment, right? So
Right.
we're operating as if it's settled forever, but nothing precludes asking again.
Yeah.
Or under a new raise grant application.
Yeah,
Or-
just to clarify though, we did have the support of the MPO to apply for the raise grant, but the TJPDC was the applicant for the raise grant. So just to note that.
Confusing part is Jessica was working here when I watched you on TV. And presenting the project, now you're with county.
So let me also ask maybe, well, so first, would the city be eligible to submit the other alignment? We have extra slots.
That's what I was trying to
We
get
could
to,
build it,
right.
but
They would be eligible through Smart Scale.
that's good. Well, we need a resolution from of support from the county because it,
Yeah, because it starts in the county, yeah. And you would also need a resolution of support from the MPO because it's within the MPO
Right.
area.
but if the county had other priorities and we weren't submitting it anyway, maybe it's a might as well situation. Of course, not that the city really maybe is planning to use, I don't know what the city's smart scale situation is, but
Now your questions.
let me ask a different way. There has been some talk floated, I know it's a sore subject again, I'm sorry, about this, another alignment outside of the two that were previously studied. Namely one in the middle of this giant thing we just purchased over there. Is that too difficult to do? Like, but we need a new preliminary, like, cost estimate study, all that stuff we had done to even explore what that would look like.
That would
And is
require
that-
local funding to do any further explanation. VDOT would not be willing to put resources into that.
Well, let me clarify, Chuck. VDOT would not do another feasibility study, but if we determined, or if the city determined that they wanted to put that forward for an application at a specific alignment, could VDOT, I mean, it's in the city at that point, right? Completely in the city?
No.
No, it'd still be in the county. Could VDOT help support the development of that specific application?
I think we would want to talking about an application, get through the planning process that's associated with the purchase of that property. The city manager has indicated needs to happen before we do anything with that property. So we probably need to actually figure out what we're doing with that before we talk about building a bridge.
Maybe, I mean, I think, you know, ultimately you're building the bridge to East High and it goes through that just makes it easier because it doesn't involve as much eminent domain. And then what you do with the property is a little bit tangential. I mean, hopefully you tie it in, you have a nice park or whatever it is.
Well, it's or whatever it is. That's
Sure, but that could be separate from, you know, that kind of bridge there. In fact, maybe puts a little bit more urgency into doing that thing. Otherwise, for 10 years before we even think about it, maybe we've already built a crossing somewhere else, or we haven't.
It could be, I'm just, as staff, I'm hesitant to get out ahead of the city manager's office with any planning efforts that they're trying to pull off or something they just want, so.
Yeah,
And I appreciate there's a thing going on with the city, but the question I think you did ask was, would VDOT do another concept plan for it? I mean, maybe not pay for the whole planning study that happened.
Yeah, the feasibility of that dual line, yeah.
Right, but if, I mean, probably a smart scale application, VDOT's gonna help them do this, you know, come up with a plan. Timing on this sounds all kind of questionable.
yeah.
I mean,
pretty
we
much.
should say,
Pretty soon.
and you want to have issues with the city, whether they can apply for projects at all.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
so it's got a whole nest of issues. But I'm just come back to that simple question of, if you did another project, did a roundabout, VDOT would help do that, whether it's the city or the county or Orange County. Would help do that, so if you did another bridge, conception could be done with a normal smart scale planning process.
Okay, tell me a little more about that. Maybe it's about round 7 and not 6, but like. You're saying feasibility study is not doable. Technical assistance is doable. What is the difference between those? Do they both need to be done?
Typically, the stuff we're doing in the other ones is like traffic analysis, hiring an engineer to do the design. Western Magico, we picked a roundabout, you know, intersection Y, and we do the concept plan and the estimation.
Right.
Just throwing out that a bridge, I don't know exactly how that works. I mean, part of it is where do you want to put the bridge, which is that feasibility component, which I think you've said, and I agree with what you just had said, probably.
That's the indication that
Not interested
we were
in
given
paying for
is,
another stuff.
if further study needed to be done, that would be a local decision, locally funded to continue to study it.
Okay, about like choosing between alignments or just like. is
Including
that
additional
alignment?
alignments that were not in the original feasibility study.
Okay.
But if you have an alignment that you picked through a process or the community said, yeah, we want to do it right here. I think VDOT would do do that preliminary conceptual estimation and plan development.
Even if the process to pick it wasn't like the detail, you know, here's where the piers would go and here's how much, here's what type of structure it is, all that stuff we did last time.
Chuck, do you want to jump in? You had started to say something. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's a lot more details that go into doing a bridge versus doing a roadway or sidewalk project, because you're talking about a lot of unknowns with the geotechnical, and from a design perspective, how many piers it is, dictates how deep the beams are and getting the clearances over. There's a lot more work that goes into the bridge design, and our L&D section actually doesn't do that. That would be something that bridge section would do, and we haven't typically done a lot of those. So I know with this last one, we had a consultant that did all that, so as part of the feasibility study. So it's a lot more involved.
Okay, and ballpark,
But-
like, what did the last feasibility study cost? Like, what does a feasibility study cost in general?
Couple $100,000.
The county recently did some like conceptual level feasibility studies for like the $20,000, $30,000 mark.
Okay.
What was it for this one? Does anybody?
Do you remember, Chuck, what this one was?
I'd have to go back and look. It was a lot more than that.
I feel like I might recall that it was like hundreds of thousands, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I want to say it was probably around 100,000, but I'm not positive. I have to go back and look.
Right, I won't belabor the bridge anymore. Anyone else have smart scale thoughts? Other projects that aren't on this list that could be eligible for MPO?
Yeah, the eligibility requirements are going to be the kicker for this. We'll have to get more direction on the Ravenna Bridge project, whether that's even still eligible project or not. Actually, after the meetings, they were asked the question several times during the meeting about bike and pedestrian bridges, and the clear response was no. So that's going to have to be something we have to discuss or ask questions about. Other than that, I think the gray area is the corridor studies. They just said recommended improvements from the studies. And you can't break up a study. You've got to do all the recommendations. And that was the difference. But we don't have that many. We do have a few. I know Sandy and I talked about them, but I don't think some of them are in a place where we'd want to submit all of the recommendations. So there's not a whole lot out there that we could submit.
So if a bike head bridge isn't submittable, do we need to talk about putting transit back on this bridge?
This is by the MPO.
Right.
Yeah.
Originally a project that had transit bike ped on it.
When you say originally,
Back when Wood Hudson.
sure.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I'd imagine the cost would go up if we add transit, and I know there are some challenges with connecting to the roads down there, but
Yeah.
I guess potentially we could see if that was something we wanted to consider.
Well, I'm thinking just in terms of, does that make it eligible?
Yeah, that would make it eligible. Yeah, it'd be a new road, it'd be a new alignment, and it would also be eligible under the new transit definition.
Emergency access.
What about capability for future transit access? Like, do you have to have a line to go over it planned, or?
Build it wide enough so
If
you
it-
can.
Yeah, if you can hold the bus.
I would imagine that you would have to, if you wanted transit to be considered, it would have to meet whatever design standards are for transit. And correct me if I'm wrong again, Chuck or Michael, I believe we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the overpasses and crossing with hydraulic. You can't just build a bridge for transit there, right? It has to meet a different design standard at that point.
Yeah, it would be a different design. It would be much heavier design for a transit vehicle. I mean, we're accommodating maintenance vehicles and stuff on the bridge, but for daily use, it's different. Live loads for a bus.
I'm assuming that would be a change of scope large enough to need a new conceptual bridge.
Mhm.
Feasibility, whatever.
streets is eligible for a connecting communities grant?
I don't know.
Sorry, I missed the first part.
If having a bridge that would hold, I guess, transit traffic, communities, I don't think it'd be big enough. Do they want like,
Reconnecting communities, our take on the announcement was that they really wanted super big corporate project, like massive change.
or like highway level?
Yeah, I think the reconnecting communities, if it's the same notice of funding opportunity that was originally, it also had to be the transportation system that was causing the disruption. So like a waterway wouldn't qualify.
Say, like, how can we quote reconnect, because the natural
Yeah.
entity is separate, the separating factor.
Yeah, it was like,
And
road there.
you'd have to make the case that Free Bridge itself is like is a problem.
It's a barrier, yeah.
But still, I think, like Alberic said, I think it's just too focused of a project for that particular.
Or like one from and partly down, that could be more feasible, but I think just one time it would not be enough, especially like not that small a bridge. And
So build all three of them.
and listen, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but.
The transit.
The worst case scenario is we have a really great raise grant application basically ready to go. So.
Can we go back to the list of stuff that we already know we have on the list?
This one?
No, the
No,
projects.
the list of projects.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we are missing a transit element here, like just in general. So I don't know if there are anything that will come out of CAT's TSP or if there's anything that's come out of John's electrification studies. We might need capital investment funds for.
Keep in mind though that the transit agencies can also apply, so,
They each have 4 applications.
yeah.
Do they use those lately?
There are very few transit applications in general in smart scale.
They're just not work well in or.
Well, I think one of the differences is that for smart scale, it's for capital improvements versus like operations. So, and then there's a lot of funding for transit that is available to come on board much sooner than smart scale would facilitate.
So they're
But maybe like if they have to build a giant new facility for their fuel study situation, would that be a big capital outlay that would qualify for smart scale?
Yes, I mean, they're going to get a large chunk of
Greenfield.
FTA.
It would have,
Pay for that, probably, right, talking like 80% of it coming from FTA, but that other 20%, yeah, we would need to make up with state and local funding. Some of it would be state funding through the state capital assistance through DRPT, but there's still gonna be millions of dollars of needs there, so potentially that could be something that the state would also step up and support through this as well, but we also don't know exactly what we're building yet, so that might be.
Yeah, probably too early for this round. What wasn't the park or the exit 107 park and ride of transit project? It wasn't, right? It was us.
it's just a park and ride, yeah.
But there was no Cruiser Connect or something.
Doesn't connect in after.
Doesn't go to it.
I think the plan was for the Action Express to start stopping there. I don't know if there's a specific connection with the Crozet Connect through John.
They've been part of the discussions about the
Yeah.
design of the park and ride, so they know that it's an option
Yeah.
in the future. But no, you're correct, they're not going there right now or
Yeah.
in the near future.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Any other projects? We're not gonna come close to filling our like slate then, right?
It's okay. I mean, it's okay with me if you end early. It's,
Oh, no, I
It
meant
means
like.
it's like-
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just because there was an unprecedented amount of projects already approved in previous rounds, and we're at the tail end of those within the existing LRTP.
Yeah.
That's a unique situation.
That makes sense. All right, well, hopefully round 7 strikes here to get better anyway. All right, let's go to staff updates, safe streets and roads for all.
So, as you may have heard, the TJPDC was awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant to develop a multi-jurisdictional safety action plan for the region. And the plan would identify opportunities to reduce and eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on the roadway network. And we are currently getting underway with this, with the plan's first working group scheduled to meet on December 14th. And we are also scheduling a regional safety summit for January 10th. And we are inviting elected officials, executive staff, and other professionals from the 4 E's of roadway safety, with the goal of getting buy-in and commitment to Vision Zero. And any questions? That's all.
So we have our summit on
January 10th.
January 10th. What's the next public engagement after that for, general public at large?
We don't have an exact timeline at this point in time. I would assume it's going to be sometime in the spring.
Okay.
We'll have public meetings with each of the jurisdictions, the local jurisdictions, in February and March following the summit to get the approval of the safety targets.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is the summit open to the public or?
Yes.
It is geared towards elected officials and county admin, but the public is able to attend if they would like to.
Cool. All right, Lucinda with transit programs.
Oh, forgot. Yeah, so we received a mobility management grant and we are working with Java to fulfill that grant. We started getting funding in October and we will be starting to provide services in January. We're hiring someone now, we have now passing it out. We've created a data system to collect the data and we've been practicing taking calls. We're working with a marketing company on getting a name and a logo and a brand that seniors and people with disabilities can trust. And we will be working on our grant application for next year, which is due February 1st. And then the regional transit governance study will be ending in December, and then in December, the final report will be presented by AECOM in the January meeting with recommendations. And that's January 25th at 4 o'clock.
The RTP meeting.
Sorry, yeah.
It'll go before the TJPDC commission this Thursday in very draft format for a first look at it, then to the RTP, and then back to the commission in February.
That's awesome.
Great, thanks. Next up, we have upcoming tip modifications.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give you all a heads up. So I know everybody loves it when we do amendments to the transportation improvement program. There's going to be some significant ones coming up because since 2015, we have always included John's scheduled expenditures in our transportation improvement program. And it just suddenly occurred to me that John does not directly receive any funding within the urbanized area, and they do not need to be included in our TIP. So we will be doing some amendments to remove those references to John's expenditures. And then what we will be doing is they are a subrecipient through CAT. They provide the paratransit services for CAT. And so we will be including the funding that John is scheduled to receive from CAT as their paratransit provider under CAT's expenditures in the TIP. And then there are going to be some other changes to CAT's expenditures based on some funding that was awarded that wasn't originally part of their estimates. So you will get the opportunity to review that amended document in January, but little sneak peek on what you can look forward to.
Okay. Annual obligation reports.
Yeah, and this is really just an FYI. So the TIP basically tells us what is scheduled to be spent, and then every year we receive a summary of what was actually spent, which is the annual obligation report. So we have received that information from DRPT and VDOT. The document has been updated and is on our website, and it was also included in your packet if you would like to review it.
All right, roundtable updates. City of Charlottesville.
Okay, I'll start and Tommy, you can throw in any gaps that I have. So I started the past couple months saying we're working on paint on the ground, safe routes to school and our campus mobility hubs. the paint slowed down because the leaves had fallen off the trees, and apparently our paint team doesn't like to paint over the leaves. So we're waiting for peak leaf to finish so we can get back to doing some paint. In the new year, we're also going to be looking at some of our safe route projects and how we're going to go from plastic to concrete. So that'll be a fun process. Bike parking inventory, I believe Tommy is mostly wrapped up with that, and now we're looking at locations, particularly around downtown and West Main Street, to put in additional parking. A lot of staples, a lot of racks to put down on the ground. Sort of in response to our zoning code changes, we are looking at doing a review of our parking permit strategy throughout the city. We're engaged in negotiations with the consultant right now over what that scope is going to look like. Probably getting that kicked off January or February. We're also looking at procurement for two basically restriping plans, one for West Main Street, one for Fifth Street. We're working directly with the consultant on West Main Street, and with Fifth Street, we're working with VDOT's bike ped office, hopefully accessing the consultant through them, also with their funding. So that's a little added bonus for us. We are working through, I believe we're in chapter 3 of CAT's TFP right now, which is looking at all of the recommended changes to service. And we are lining up chapter 4, which looks at what the capital requirements of those recommendations. We're trying to line that up with our alternative fuel study so that we know exactly how many buses we need and what kind of fuel source can actually run on the routes that we're suggesting. So we're working through that right now. Our ADA transition plan, we have collected all the data on physical infrastructure at this point and are heading into a prioritization process. It's largely going to be focused on equity, but we're also trying to tie in the draft prioritization process that we did last year on sidewalk projects, so that once we finish the ADA transition plan, we can come in and finish that sidewalk prioritization and marry those two together and know exactly what projects we're going to be doing to both fix our expansion plans and our ADA compliance. So both of those will be paired together next spring. City manager's office has already announced that I'll be finishing the sidewalk priorities by June, so we should have a pretty good idea by the end of this fiscal year what we'll be building the next fiscal year. So, anything else I missed on the side?
Well, I don't know that everybody's aware that we have a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee, and we're meeting this Thursday at 5 o'clock. It's always the first Thursday of the month, and our ADA coordinator, Paul, will be there to explain that update to anyone who's interested via Zoom, and links on our website. One other thing I'll just point out, come 2024, I'll be starting to do a neighborhood monthly walk series. And the reason why I think that might be beneficial for you all is outreach opportunities might be helpful as you're thinking about some of your programs and your projects within that. But also, if there's anything that you see that might be beneficial for me to communicate to people, please let me know as I'm taking people hopefully walking through our city.
Doing the first one we're doing in January.
I wish I had more details on this. I am partnering with UVA, Sustainability Department, and the county's, what is Jesse's?
Office of Equity Inclusion.
Office of Equity Inclusion, to some degree, with the MLK Walk, starting downtownish and running through Pikeville, potentially the new Tonsler Park, and so forth. Stay tuned for details.
Ben, do we need to buy public service some brooms for the leaves or?
Yeah, it's the same crew that does the leaves, that does the painting, so they're a little unpaid.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, so from the city planning commission side, I guess the only big news is tonight is the public hearing for the new zoning code. You should all show up. Tell your thoughts to council.
You guys are adopting the zoning code?
Some say VDOT hasn't heard about it.
Oh,
Cheers.
Albemarle County.
Yeah. You guys, the city is doing a lot of on the ground stuff. We are in a very conceptual, philosophical space of working on our comp plan. I think that's really taking up all of our time right now. There is a joint school board and board of supervisors meeting tomorrow where we'll be talking about some projects, which includes the Lambs Lane Loop Road project, as well as a little bit more information about the 3 Notch Trail Shady Path Master Plan. That's it.
All right. MPO or Albert?
No, yeah, just, that's all back end stuff.
Cool. MPO TGPC?
No, I'll just mention the raise grant notice of funding opportunity. So we'll get some general feedback from the policy board at the next meeting if they would like us to continue to move forward with resubmitting the application.
When is the next application deadline?
Oh, February.
Moved.
Then no, it's the end of February.
Oh, I thought they moved it.
Oh, that's.
They're moving it next year.
Okay.
It's been a year.
February.
Mhm.
Okay, for clarification, policy board is on.
Yes, at 10 a.m.
Thank you for noting that change.
Be done.
Well, we made, I think, the comments. About what we're up to, project pipeline. Personally, I'm gonna be, my last day will be obviously end of the week. Everybody knows that, but
Stay on the committee.
well, maybe, yes, I don't know, I'll have to figure all that out, but good to have more candidates, so I'm looking forward to work with you guys and work with everybody.
Yeah. Congratulations, Michael.
Excited.
DRPT.
Morning, everyone. I'll be very quick. My first update is a little familiar to you all. As you've probably seen and heard, especially on MPO staff, we have officially updated our grants management system. So we're now on web grants, and our launch coincided with the opening of our FY25 grant cycle. So anyone who's interested in participating in the FY25 grant cycle will have to go through our web grants website in order to apply. And there is plenty of information on our website as well as the DRPT YouTube channel as far as how-tos to set up your account as well as going through the different funding opportunities. And then the second bit of news is a little bittersweet. You may have seen our director, Jennifer DeBrule, is retiring come June 4th. So we will be in search of a new director this summer. So if you're interested in being my boss's boss's boss, the secretary is looking. But definitely want to highlight an amazing more than 30 years of service, both with VDOT and DRPT. And we're wishing her well in her retirement. That's all I've got. Any questions?
I do have one DRPT question, actually. So I know that you all had submitted the Commonwealth Corridor East-West train to the FRA Corridor ID program. Last I heard, they were supposed to announce the recipients. Well, it's supposed to be like spring or something, but last I heard was November. Do you guys have any idea when that is happening and if we're likely to be selected?
That's an awesome question, and I think is probably more appropriate for either our rail team or VPRA, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. So I'm happy to follow up on that 100%. We can check with our rail planning team and see if they've got a sense of that. I unfortunately just deal with transit infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds great. That makes sense. Put on the spot.
I've been Googling to see if they've released the awards yet.
Yeah. And it turns out just the other day, North Carolina said they submitted like 12 projects. They're just knocking off the whole system. Rideshare.
This will also be pretty quick. We are having our official kickoff of the CAP strategic plan. That's the commuter assistance, which rideshare falls under through DRPT on next Thursday, 14th. So we hired the consultant and have worked through all of that. We were waiting on some additional funding since the funding structure kind of changed. We were able to access some additional funds through DRPT from, I think, feds, and that kind of put everything a little bit on pause for a moment, but we have now got all that paperwork figured out. So we will start the official kickoff next week and still anticipate at this time to have it completed by the end of the fiscal year. But we have confirmed that there is some wiggle room due to that delay if we need to extend in the other. But right now the schedule looks like we'll be able to complete it. So there will be a little bit of some stakeholder engagement. It's going to go over, target marketing, all kinds of different things. So we're really excited to get the process started. And then, now it's December, so it's time to be thinking about FY25 grants.
Who's your consultant on the?
It is Launch Consulting. Yeah, here locally.
Cool. Other cat, do we pass along updates?
For CAT, I think I already captured the two, TSP and the alternative fuel study are the two major efforts going forward. We're also working with DRPT to come up with plans for shelter locations around the city. They should be wrapping up the first one in the next week or two, and that'll be Belmont Park for moving what had previously been constructed as a shelter location that's put in a not great place. We're moving into a different part of the park and making it more ADA compliant. The sidewalk there. So that would be the first thing you see from our collaboration with the RVT on shoulders. Cool. John.
They did indicate that they would be unlikely to be able to participate through the end of the year. So.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
UVA.
The real big updates. The legal, the Cumulative Commons Bridge across Salmon Street, being pedestrian mostly, but I think it always sent bikes to an ADA compliant way across. Should be open soon. I don't have an exact date. That's kind of the next big thing. I'm neck of the woods.
Cool. All right. Anyone I missed? No. We're good. Matters from the public. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak? I do not think we do. All right. I think this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.